Today I'm gonna talk about something that I pretty much never see being talked about, and that's why I think general education in college is a net negative. Um, this you'll see this abbreviated as Gen Eds, and I have it abbreviated in the title head, um, or at least I plan to. But most people already know that. So, what I want to talk about today is like not just like the negative stuff, because like there are positive things, but I think the negative stuff outweighs the positive stuff, if that makes sense. And I have met a lot of people who are like in favor of them, and who they think they're fine, or they think, because everybody's got like this bias of like, they're the field that they're in, like every thinking everybody should be in that field, even though it's not for everybody. Like, I think, somebody who just switched my major to philosophy, I think that's only meant for like some people. I don't think it's definitely not made for everybody. Um, because I've met people who got, kind of annoyed at the idea of like questioning even basic things. Um, and if you're one of those people, that's fine, but maybe philosophy's not for you. But so that's why I'm not sure um about like potentially adding more requirements. Again, there are like other people who, say we need this requirement and that requirement and like that kind of thing, because they may see that as useful. But it's tough because like there definitely are some useful things that you can totally learn in college. There are things that you can learn that will absolutely help you. But instead of like requiring them as gen eds, a lot of them are like you have to actively find them. Like they're not going to teach you like money management in most classes. You have to be like a business major to take many of those, or might be able to take it as a gen ed, but like you have to actually pick that class. Um, and it's especially worse when you go to a college that like, you know, maybe your first semester or your first year they'll pick your schedule for you. Because I definitely go to one of those. In fact, my school has been, I will say their gen ed system has been worse lately. Over the past 3 years, they have required 6 extra credits, and I believe they're up to like over 40 credits in gen eds. Um, that's definitely not the most I've seen, but some schools will have like required seminars, and those are just a mixed bag. Then my school did this thing where they tried to like get all of them to teach some of the same stuff, and I'm just like, these are so different. Like you really can't like mix them in together, because um global education, for example, which was the thing they required for all the seminars, has nothing to do with cognitive psychology, or at least my professor couldn't really find a way to relate the two, and I don't blame her. Um, because if somebody with a PhD doesn't know how to do that, then my guess is it's either really hard or just, there's not really a connection there. Um, so yeah, my school also required like, I think they call it civic discourse now. Um, that's gonna, and while I was meeting with my advisor yesterday to change my major, um, and get help with picking classes, um, I got a little bit of insight on like the process of this. So, if you go to a state school, the state's gonna like set the gen eds. Otherwise, the school will do it themselves. Um, but like I noticed that you need to um I noticed that there's like a specific process you need to get in order to like if you're a professor in order to like get your class registered for fulfilling credit, which means there's this period of time where like the first year or two that the gen ed is offered that the gen ed was required, there's going to be like almost no classes that give you credit for it. So the good news is only like incoming people have to get the credit, but I don't like that because I don't like that they're requiring even more classes and like civic discourse, which I'm guessing is like, talking about political issues or something like that. That's what it sounds like. We already have a we already have like a US history and kind of like a political science requirement. It doesn't cover like all the political science credits. I think it should. Um um but there it's essentially like giving people two political science requirements or like at least one because you can get the other from US history, but I mean, U.S. history, think about it, as a lot of civic discourse. It's just discourse about stuff that may not be as relevant, because some of it definitely is. And other times it's, even if, you talk about slavery and have a little discourse about that, um, you could probably find ways to relate it to today's society. So I'm not going to say like it's not related, because you could probably find ways. Um, Especially if history has a tendency to keep repeating itself. So it just feels a little redundant. Um, and it's tough because politics is one of those subjects that like you probably can't learn too much on. Same with history. I think I touched on this before where it's just like in another video where it's just like you take something like math or science and eventually you get to a point where it stops. I don't want to say it stops becoming useful, but like once you get point past the point of like where the average citizen can understand you, then it gets a little um it might be a little different because honestly, you can find uses for um upper level math like calculus and stuff, but there aren't going to be any for like the average person. So, if you like math that much and want to pursue, upper level math, then go ahead. But like if you make everybody take it, math in college, just to be well rounded when the way the school system's designed, they're just gonna forget it in what, a year? Less than that? They're gonna be focused on other classes. They're gonna be focused on their major, which is what they should be focused on. Um, and I will say that because like I'm not a math major. I'm like losing motivation to even try in my gen ed math class because it is literally only stuff I learned in high school. And the professor's nice, but I feel bad that she has to teach it because like pretty much nobody pays attention. And this is like the lowest level math class you could get. Um, so she got stuck with all the people who probably aren't going to use too much math, or at least too much college level math. Because I will agree when people say like everybody uses math at some point. I will not agree when people say everybody uses like high school and college math because the only time I've had to do that is in an academic setting. I've never had to do it in a job. Like even like in an entry level job, the only the only like math skills I guess you would need are recognizing money and counting it and that kind of thing. But that's stuff that like your parents usually teach you anyway. And if not, maybe they'd be willing to teach you on the job. I don't know. Um, I don't want people to take away, that I want people to get dumber. I think, if people like math, they should absolutely be able to take it. If people like any subject, they should be able to take it. It's just, you know, a the average student, for example, you need a high school degree to get into college. I'm pretty sure, like pretty much any college. Um, and in that, in high school and a lot of times before it, because you're learning basic math in elementary school. Essentially, you're spending a lot of like time in school on math, and so it's pretty clear to every student. I will say every student because you spend 12 years um doing some level of math off and on. You're going to know whether or not you're interested in it or not. Maybe you won't. Maybe you don't know if you want to like pursue it, but you'll know if you're interested in it, if that makes sense. So I don't know. And I, took my math class because it was branded as a real life application course, but like I haven't had to use too much of it. Um, if anything, um, because it's like all high school level. Um, pretty much. Like anything that I didn't learn in 11th grade, algebra 2, I learned in like the finance stuff that we covered, I learned in like my intro to business class that I took in 11th grade. Um and math stands out because like it's tough because you could maybe find uses for this, but then you have to justify people um spending like an extra 2 years at most because think about it, if you didn't have required stuff, um people would be able to like instantly go into their major. And for those who don't know, they can, they're you should be able to let them take a variety of classes. I think this should be an option, like an option, but not a requirement, if that makes sense. And I will say I probably would have benefited from that because I came in as an English major and I could have spent, after I started losing the passion, I probably could have spent another semester doing like a lot of like a variety of things. Or I could have just instantly switched to philosophy, which that would have only set me back, a semester in the system, like the system I'm thinking of. But it's not the worst. Um, it's like, is this knowledge that you may need, but is not a guarantee for pretty much any subject? Um, only some people are going to need it. Um, is it worth spending? For me, it'd be like $60,000 for those 2 years. And even if you do it at like a community college, that can, like, not all of those are cheaper necessarily. Um, so there's, I've touched on math. Um, there are, that is probably one of the least useful subjects, I feel like. Um, because if you take something like, again, you could probably never know too much history or too much like political science because like you can find a lot of ways to relate it to stuff. You can do it with philosophy too. That's why like so many ancient philosophers like still talk about things that are like people still talk about them because like their issues are still the issues that they brought up like 2000 years ago are still relevant. Um and however, as useful as history is to know, people have had to deal with social studies in general for again like 12 years. I don't know how much they covered in like preschool and stuff, but at least 12 years, if you're going down the standard American path. I don't know um what it's like in other countries. Um but like if you go to a college here, like it's way too expensive and they have all these classes that like you're required to take. Um so like social studies is more useful than math probably, but people still generally know if they like it or not. Um 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 then with something like English, it's a little tough because you could argue English does a lot of like perspective taking and critical thinking. Um I personally don't see a lot of critical thinking elements to it. I see it as, you know, somebody gives you an interpretation. It kind of like how um Catholicism works, where, somebody gives you an interpretation of scripture. And I don't know if it's probably not like that in every English class. I don't think it's been like that in every English class I've been in, but like in a lot of times there's something that, the author is leaning towards or something that the teacher feels is true. And you may come up with an interpretation that's different, but you may get it's like the idea that there are like multiple correct answers, but like one is better in the teacher's eyes. That's what English feels like at times. Um and you're doing like a lot of analysis that you wouldn't really do in any other way, I guess. That's why it doesn't feel like critical thinking because you're not usually able to like you're able to question it more than stuff like math and science because those things are supposed to be seen as like concrete. Um, but I really haven't found a use for like literary analysis outside of an academic setting. Um, and like maybe it changes the way like you think about things, but I've noticed that more with like philosophy. Um, that's if you contemplate things that are very taboo and that most people don't think about because they're like granted often. Um, and pretty early on, most people can figure out if they like reading and writing. Um, because everybody's gonna need to do it in a basic sense. Like I think it's very important learning to read and write, but like so much of middle and high school English is just reading whatever the teacher says to read. And maybe there's a benefit to that. Like there probably are that I like am not seeing, so I'm not gonna say like, get rid of it. Um but like by the time people are done with high school, they can usually tell that they're that they may not be into English. And the ones that are, they go on to be English majors, which is what I thought I was gonna be. Um and I guess the same thing with science. You take a lot of it, whether or not um you generally know whether or not you're interested in it. Um, there are there are generally like foreign language requirements in most schools. I don't have a lot to say on that because I don't know like how useful they are because I don't know how much like a basic level college class of a foreign language class is going to teach you because I took Spanish for like 5 years and got certified bilingual, so I know more than like the average person. In Spanish, I'm not fluent in it, but what is it? I've had to like talk to people in Spanish at my job before, but that's over the course of like 5 years. And considering you're required to do it in middle school and to some extent in high school, I think. Um, most people are gonna forget it. And I think that's a big thing. It's like foreign languages can be useful, but until we stop encouraging the system that that where people just forget everything once they um once they once they're done with the class. And, like too many times I think we blame the students or like, oh, you're not studying in summer, you should be studying, to keep everything fresh. um I don't know if you've had parents who like want you to study in summer for that reason. um but I just feel like it's not always the student's fault. I think it's just a systemic thing where it's like they're being taught things, they're being forced to take classes that they probably aren't interested in. And that's gonna have an impact on them cognitively because their brain's not gonna wanna work for something that they don't think they're gonna get out of. And I think it goes back to like, biology and like how we've evolved where it's like, I could be spending the day picking up sticks, counting rocks or whatever, but I could also be spending that time finding food. And I think most humans, if they want to survive, would spend that time finding food. So it's like we look for the things that benefit us, and if we don't think it benefits us, then we don't invest any energy in it. Um, so I don't know. Again, like I would need more information on like the usefulness of foreign languages and like I'm sure this country would be better off if like we had a um what is it if we were able to like I don't want to say teach it in a better way because like so many teachers they try their hardest to like get students to engage in their content and like sometimes it just doesn't work because the students naturally aren't into it and many of them will never be into it. um Now there is now I found this interesting. A lot of schools, regardless of like the political affiliation, will require an environmental sustainability credit. I don't think my school has like a specific environmental sustainability requirement, but you could get a gen ed from taking one. Uh, so I definitely found that interesting. Um, because usually they don't like they'll spend a little bit of time on environmental science. Um, but usually, like for example, when I was in high school, there like you could take a whole class on that. Um, we also, there's most schools have like a social science requirement. They're nice to learn. They're never pretty much never taught in high school. I think we had one psychology class, and that was child psychology, and it was very broad because it was it attracted like a lot of people interested in psychology but also in like education because that's a very good like class to take if you know you want to be a teacher and work with children. um it was mostly like sophomore girls who took that class, I remember. um and then you get into the more controversial stuff. um lot of left-leaning schools in particular will have a DEI requirement. Um, like there are, even though it's weird, like it's not only a left leaning school thing I noticed, like even in red states, even big schools in red states will have them, which is strange. Because I would have expected it to be like a mostly liberal college thing, considering DEI is a very like left leaning thing. Um, I really don't know. I it's such a complicated issue that like I can't speak too much on it because didn't um I didn't devote my college, my undergrad to women and gender studies. So like somebody who has done that, or maybe somebody who's done it with political science, they're going to be able to tell you a lot more. So I'm just going to say, I'm not the person for that. Um, Sometimes there'll be like a visual or performative arts requirement. Um, and it depends on, it's going to depend on somebody's interest in these classes. Um, my guess is visual arts and performing arts is like theater. Um, I guess performing arts could encompass like music in general. Um, Especially if you're in an ensemble. Um, but then visual arts would be like studio and digital art, um, pottery probably, um, and like a lot of that kind of thing. Um, oh, photography, um, and like many people, that's another thing is like many people know they don't want to do that stuff. Um, because, you're required to take art in elementary school for most schools do that. I was required to take art until 7th grade. Um, and by then I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like you could take art in 8th grade in high school, but I didn't want to because I didn't like it like in an academic setting. It felt like, it's a common complaint I hear, like it felt very subjective, I guess. Um, I'm not gonna speak on like what I feel are shortcomings of that, like academic art, because I think, learning art, especially as a younger kid, when you need like the motor skills, like those haven't been developed yet, that is very useful for like getting those skills to develop. Um, so some schools have an oral communication requirement. Um, if we lived in a place with actually good gen ed systems, because I do think that's possible, um, then any class that wasn't a lecture would be that wasn't like lecture heavy could give you this credit because something like my philosophy of ethics class, that is like half discussion and half lecture. So like I guess it depends on like what the school, like how much discussion based the class has to be. Um I don't know. I've also like, of course there are the obvious ones like you can get it for like public speaking, like a debate class. Um but luckily that's not the only thing you can get it with. Um, and if you've seen one of my older videos, probably from like summer 2025, I made a story time video about like my experience in public speaking. Um, so like now I'm gonna get more into like the 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 philosophy side of it because you're not gonna really get schools um that require like a philosophy credit specifically. You know, usually philosophy gives you a humanities credit or something. Um, you will sometimes see an ethics requirement. Um, but I guess you could cover that through like a political science class because that often deals with like the most ethical way to go about something. You know, go about like governing people or go about um making money, for example. Um, and ethics was one of the only classes I could actually critically think in because it was my professor's goal was, and why you still say is because I'm still taking that class, is to, you know, he's not trying to convince you that a specific opinion is correct. And it reminds me of the way like therapy is practiced, where they aren't supposed to let their opinions get in the way. Um, and considering that like many people see college as like a place to learn to critically think, I have not known that to be true, except in that except in my philosophy classes. And you know, many people aren't gonna take that. Um, and even then I'm like a lot of people are a lot of people just kind of wing it in those classes and they're not like really interested in it. Um, my my professor made a joke, I think last week, where he was like, if Karl Marx was still alive, he'd be surprised that most of you, or he said all of you, um, he'd be surprised that all of you were taught nihilism and just like more or less ignored it. That like it didn't convert you, it didn't make you like think about anything. And that's like, you know, of course that got me thinking about nihilism, but I'm also like, you know, gonna be a philosophy major, so I'm, you know, it's probably best that I think about that if I want to do good in my classes. But that was crazy that like the amount of times we were presented with life-changing information and people just like didn't do anything. Like some of them didn't even feel shocked. And I think it's like, I guess the best way to represent it is probably the allegory of the cave, where it's just like they feel comfortable. I It's like, you know, you get out of the cave, you wanna, but you're very uncomfortable and you find comfort in the cave. But the cave is not real, if that makes sense. So I'm not saying, you know, nihilism is like objectively correct. Because I don't know if anything's objectively correct, but I was just using that as an example. Um, and I think more classes should like be less opinion focused, where it's like the professor doesn't the professor asks, why this specific theory, like this specific like sociological theory, I actually got that on an exam. It's like, why is this specific sociological theory like problematic, I guess? I forget how it was worded. Um, you will may sometimes this is like if you go to a religious school, gonna they'll likely require you to take some sort of religion class. Um, sure, people could benefit from it. Um, but it's also like most schools don't require them. I don't have like too much to say. I haven't like taken a religion class. I might next semester. If I can. Um, so yeah, now I'm going into I went into like the different subjects. Now I want to like go into what actually like the general system is. If you study the most popular schools from, the biggest schools in each state, for example, you're gonna get a gen ed distribution that's like, I would probably say between 25 and 50, or 25 and maybe 55. I don't know. Um, you're gonna get a decent gap, most likely. Um, because like for the most part they're the same like core subjects. Like, pretty much everybody's going to require math, science, English, but history, but like the difference lies in how much and what they separate it into. Like sometimes a school will say you need two classes in writing and two classes in literature, so they split like English up in half. But you need to take more classes in like that individual area. Um, some schools will say, you need two lab sciences, so that usually gives you like 8 credits total instead of, six for two classes. It's eight. Um, sometimes they'll do one lab science, one non-lab science. That's what mine does. Um, and sometimes they'll do all of that. Sometimes they'll go, 6 math credits, 8 science credits, and, six. Sometimes they want you to do like two of everything. 6 credits in history, um, 6 credits in reading, 6 credits in writing, um, again, splitting that English part up. Um, and I know this, I want to apologize for that this video is not like as structured as I thought it was going to be, and as like other people's videos are. I don't see too many videos on this stuff. Like you could probably find videos about like the problems with higher education in general, but you're pretty much never gonna find videos on like the annoying aspects of like gen eds. Um, I believe that's because mostly, if you search stuff like that, you're mostly going to find like introductory videos on college websites, or that that are run by a specific college that are maybe like 2 minutes long, or maybe they're listed as shorts. And you'll find a lot of those. But I guess now I'm gonna go into like the a lot of the common arguments I hear for it, and I'm gonna do my best to refute them. Um, because I'm not saying, most people don't agree. Most people won't agree with me. Actually, I think that might be true, but like, there are gonna be some people who agree with me. And like, maybe they have trouble saying it out loud because oftentimes they can't say it out loud. I'll tell you my experience with saying it out loud. I had one professor who just like, she was like, I wouldn't have a job if we didn't have these gen ed classes. And I'm just like, but you teach mostly upper levels. Like you're teaching mostly people in the major. And it's like I'm not seeing these classes, like these gen ed level classes, except maybe like gen ed math, I don't know. Um, because gen ed math would probably be too easy for math majors. Um, Although you could still keep it for like people who, aren't sure they want to go into math. Um, so like there's still gonna be uses for it. But it's just a matter of like not everything should require it, I guess. Um, so yeah, now I'm gonna go into like a lot of common arguments for it. First off, a lot of people claim they make students more well-rounded. I think that is kind of true. There are a lot of students, again, because of the way the education system is designed, who will just forget everything once they're done. And I don't think that's their fault. Um, it has become so normalized to um it's become so normalized to not to just like it's completely normal to forget something in like society's eyes. Forget what you learned in school. And it's like if we're requiring people go to school and learn all this information, and you guys think it's useful, then why is it okay that people are forgetting it? I don't think it's the worst thing that like people are forgetting at stuff, but this stuff, but like when colleges turn around and say, you have to take this, it's like, we already did it, and we know we're just going to forget it. So like, why are we paying all this money? I guess. Um, Next up, they help students figure out what they want to do. Um, yeah, they do. Um, I guess, but it comes at a cost. I see it as they think the right solution is to make them take classes in areas they already know they don't like. So, people, when they come into college, they'll know a little bit about what they want want to do, what they don't want to do. They're not going to know everything. Um, Most likely, they may not know what field they want to go in. That's completely okay. Um, but I would just think, don't make them take classes in areas they know they don't like. Because if that's one of your main reasons, I don't know what a lot of the main reasons are, because like this is just not only in no particular order, these reasons, but also like people emphasize them to different extents depending on who you ask. So I don't think this reason is very strong. It's still a reason that like, why it could be good, but I don't think it's a completely strong one, because I don't like the idea that you have to take classes in areas you don't like. Plus, it's hard to drop them because if you drop two classes, you lose all your federal aid and you're no longer a full-time student. So that messes things up. So it's hard to like even drop them, even though they're like in theory, they'd be basic information about a specific subject. This information could either be too basic to the point where you already know it, or like, or it could be like, even if it's like the perfect difficulty, people still aren't going to enjoy it because they know they don't want to do it, but you're making them take classes that they don't want. Next up, they provide necessary skills for the workspace and life, the workforce and life in general. From the few years I've worked, that it does not feel true. I don't know people who I think it's going to depend because you say you're an education major, that's absolutely going to be true. They're literally preparing you to be a teacher and then you be a teacher. Um but with other degrees, like good example would be like history, I think, or even like if we take philosophy, um with a philosophy degree, you could probably do a lot with it. Now I know most people go either to grad school or they go to law school. Um and I don't know if philosophy will give you like skills for like actually practicing law, but it might help you in law school. I don't know. Um Again, like take this with a grain of salt. I'm not even close to going to law school. I could probably get in, or I don't know if I'd get in, but like maybe, but because my mom used to be a paralegal, but yeah, I could get some help with that, but I don't know if I'm interested in it. Um there's this quote, we go to the next reason. There's this quote I found um from Dr. Dr. Christopher Hilo of SNHU, and he says general education is there so you can enjoy different perspectives on your life as a human being, not solely as a participant in our economy. I personally think you're solely a participant in this economy by allowing systems with these requirements to continue. And like this isn't true because colleges have kind of like it feels like they fooled us into thinking that we need this, that like this is the best option, when in reality, again, like we're just gonna forget a lot of this stuff. And if you use what you learned in your gen ed classes, good for you, but that's not a guarantee. um in that case, like your money would be probably hopefully well spent, but like that's not gonna happen with everybody. Okay, next up, different perspective taking and diverse learning. Okay, so in the classes, it's true, it's an amazing thing, but it's not true in every class, especially in classes where, they're very lecture heavy, or they're very much like giving you information, you have to roll with it. Um, if you're not taking like if you're taking something like anthropology, psychology, sociology, um, philosophy to some extent, um, you can get a lot of different perspective. Political science is another one. You can get a lot of different perspectives. Um, You could probably get it in history too, but in like science and math, you really can't get it as much. Um, and the most diversity you're gonna have in those classes is like comparing your math professor with your high school math teachers. They'll probably teach it in a different way than you learned it in high school, but I don't know, from my experience, like, it's the same thing. Okay, next up. Students can choose which classes fill the requirement. This isn't always true. If you look at enough schools, you can see that not all of them, but some of them will require everybody to take maybe the lowest level English level class or history or math courses. And even if there are choices, they're often disproportional. There are like 40 classes I think I counted that'll give me my DEI credit at my school, but only six. I think it was six. It was either five or six. Um, Five or six classes give me credit for my U.S. history, um, you know, kind of political science credit. Um, and of those classes, three of them are upper division, hard to get into because, they're meant for like juniors and seniors, and those classes are prohibited for freshmen anyway. So it's like you got to go out of your way to get into those classes. Um, and it kind of encourages you to like push that gen ed aside. And I don't want anybody to have to still take these in their like junior or even senior year. Um, because by then, you might be burnt out on college. You might just be like, get me out of here. I wanna go into the workforce. Maybe you're eager to go in the workforce and you can't because you're stuck taking a class because that you don't want to take. Number seven, they test those who already declared a major about whether or not their major is their true passion. Um, okay. Taking classes in a student's major is ultimately what will decide whether or not they want to continue, at least from what I've seen. In my experience, in people I've talked to's experience, um, they may not know what they want to do next. For example, I had this period where I was just like, I don't want to be an English major, but I don't know what I want to be. Then I settled on philosophy because I liked my intro class and I was like, I'm interested in taking more of this. So I took ethics and I was like, okay, yeah, I'm going into philosophy. Um, and so I don't think that I'm convinced that taking something like sociology or history of astronomy, those classes weren't what made me figure out that I don't want to be an English major. It was taking intro to literary studies right now. Um, and that class really only works if you're like passionate about English, if you really like literary analysis. Um, and I don't. I prefer writing over reading, but that's, my school emphasizes the opposite, so they're definitely connected, but it's like I prefer I didn't want to sit through like literary analysis after literary analysis class only to take, maybe one writing class or one grammar class and then, go back to the literary analysis. Um, if you want to think about it from a Christian school's perspective, it allows everybody to see the variety of things in God's creation. I won't comment on the specifics of like the religious part of it because I made enough of those videos and I may make more, but any claim that you weave God into it becomes like unfalsifiable, and that's it's pretty annoying to deal with. Number nine, they build critical thinking skills. I already touched on this a little bit. I don't think most of them do. Um, I've been told more times than I can count to trust the process, especially in math or science, when you're like just taking the professor's word for it. And sometimes you aren't allowed to like question things without annoying the professor, which becomes very contradictory on the school's part. Next up, they build communication skills. Um, Again, I already brought this up a little bit. Lecture classes don't. There's not an element of, group work, presentations, speeches, discussion. If it's just the professor lecturing about something people need to know for the test, there's no like interaction. There's no communication because it's one-sided. And I know it's possible even in like math and science because that was exactly what my 12th grade statistics class was. It was hands-on. We did a lot of like activities, worked with our classmates, constantly changed our seats so we could work with different people. And I think that's the best way to like go about it if you truly want to build communication skills. Um, that doesn't seem to be the case in college, though. 11. They build problem solving skills and allow for more creative solutions. Okay, so I feel like the way the classes are set up only encourages students like to think about the topic at hand. History of astronomy isn't going to build like problem solving skills in other areas because the problems these scientists are trying to solve are Einstein levels of complicated. Um 12. They help students navigate a world that keeps changing. Okay, well then why is the college system as old as the Industrial Revolution? Many people see it as outdated, and I can totally see that. They give students the knowledge and ability to analyze and produce quantitative and scientific data. Okay, how necessary is that though? Maybe analyzing math and science will help, but you do that in high school? You do that a lot in high school? Producing such content feels unrealistic for an undergrad student who, especially who isn't majoring in those subjects. Maybe you might have a math major, you might assign, a paper for, a 5-page paper for your math majors to write, but um or maybe they'll have to design like an experiment with like statistics and stuff and write that out. But I don't know if you do that in undergrad, but I don't think you can expect um people who aren't going to be math and science majors to do that. It definitely makes it sound like general education prepares students to write PhD level research papers, and it's obviously not what you're doing in undergrad. 14, they allow students to start networking and get to know people. Networking is nice and all, it's a tool that you'll probably need in the workforce. It gets you surprisingly far in society, but what good is networking in an area that you don't like? An area that you weren't going to go in anyway? I think we would rather all spend our time networking, like getting to know more people in the field we enjoy to give us a better chance in that field than in a field that we don't want to go in. This would help people get jobs they're actually passionate about. And then, when workers start enjoying their job, they're more motivated to work, and then society starts benefiting from it from there. Um, okay. And last up, they allow for students to get to know others with different areas of interest. Okay. one of the better points. I don't really have anything negative to say about that. Like I said, there are good things about this. It's just any good thing has to be worth, you know, you have to actually like quantify it. Like the few good reasons that I feel like there are not worth the extra, 50 to 75, however much money 2 years costs, 50 to $75,000. Um, and it's very tough because so many people I know just don't agree with me. So I wanted to make this for the few people out there who probably do agree with me, and I wanted to go more in depth with it. Um, so I think, it's pretty suspicious that we don't require an economics class, but you know, we're being taught, we're being told, we got to do all this to become better citizens. I probably should have put that on the list, because that's what my school tells me a lot. Um, have everybody take an economics class, like a financial literacy class. Have everybody take a um like a consumerism class, so people are, it's harder for businesses to manipulate people. Um, unfortunately the system just like rewards people who do that, but we don't have to stand for it. And if you say, if anybody here, thinks that college is a scam, I don't think that's far-fetched, because if we look at the credits, for me it's a third of my degree. Some people it's close to half of their degree is gen eds. Some schools will have like, because pretty much every school is like the 120 credit graduation, which is pretty standard. Many will have like a 60 credit um non-major coursework requirement, where you can't half your credits can't be in your major, on top of, the amount of gen eds you're taking. If, there's 60 gen eds, or 60 credits of gen eds, and you have that non-major coursework requirement, then it's a little redundant. But other times it's just like, you know, I could get I could get my 40 credits of gen eds, but I can't take 80 in my major. I have to take at most 60 in my major. Um, and with a philosophy department as small as my school's, that's not really gonna be feasible. So I'm probably gonna, if I don't, drop out, I'm um gonna take some other classes. But that's another thing, like pretty much no school allows you to like stack gen eds, if that makes sense. Like you can't, some courses will fill multiple requirements, but some then schools will turn around and say, no, you can only do it with one. Um, you'd only get one or the other, but you can't get both. And it's like, what are we doing? Like we're punishing people who, you really want your system set up that way. I know it sounds like people are abusing the system if they do that, but it's also like they'll get the required, areas they want, that you want them to get. I think it's just silly on the school's part, and for me, it sounds like a money grab. Honestly, it sounds like they're just doing it to keep students an extra 2 years. And we've gotten so used to thinking that this is just okay, spending all this money for required classes that most people aren't interested in. Like, if you have ever been in, like, maybe if you're watching this, you're a thinker like me, and you've probably noticed that, like, most people in any gen ed class won't do too much. They won't participate. They may not go to class all the time. Um, and they're not interested. And too many times we see people blame the students. Um, but I think it's the way the college system is set up. It's like they encourage you to do that. Now, what I would think would work is, you know, you get rid of them, all those requirements. People can do their major in 2 years instead of four. Federal aid can last, 3 years instead of five. Because, we want to give people an extra year or half a year if they don't know what they want to do. They want to take some, like, various levels of classes. We should be able to, like, let them do that. And really, only people who would hurt are, the spoiled, like, higher ups in colleges. Because the workforce would definitely benefit. They'd get equally qualified candidates in half the time. Yeah, that would make college a lot more competitive. Um, Although that would drive the price down if it's more competitive. Um, it could. I also think that, like, not everybody should have to go to college. I know that sounds like not obvious, but um many people think you need college to be successful, and I know, like, the generation before me was told that a lot, that, it's just a natural next step, you have to do it in order to get a good job. And I was told that too, encouraged by most people to go, and it doesn't feel worth it, honestly. Um, like, I'd rather, have all the time I want on my hands, save money, um, and I can study philosophy on my own time. I can, there's a lot of great podcasts, a lot of great videos online about philosophy. Um, and I guess, like, I don't think you need a degree to, like, study philosophy or, like, really study most things, because I've learned more from watching geometry videos on YouTube to help me prepare for the geometry regents than than anything my teachers taught me. And I say plural because there were three of them. Not all at one time, but I might go into that in another video, but I don't know. So, if you're hesitant and about going to college, and the idea of these requirements worry you, because, like, a lot of they've schools have gotten better about, like, teaching. They don't always know, like, what college is going to be like, but they'll tell you, like, the things that you do in college generally. Um, like, the idea of writing papers, you do that in a few classes. I don't do it in as many classes as I expected, but I definitely do it. I've had to do like two or three this semester, and it's not even over yet. Um, but if you're like going back and forth about like whether or not these are going to be useful, you know, it depends on your high school, I think. You know, if you went to a small budget, um, public high school, then you could you could probably learn some stuff in your gen ed classes. Um, but if your parents have money, sent you to a private school, or if you went to like to like a rich public school, um, then you're probably already gonna know this stuff. And like I said, especially if you're in New York and you took Regents, it feels like a lot of the same stuff. And to me, I don't think that's worth it. I think it needs to change, but most people won't agree with me. Um, if you do agree with me and you got to this point, I want to thank you.